Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave.
And Mickey.
And Ricky. Broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, where it's more than just radio, so jump into the chat room if you can. This is show number 294.
490 and 200.
Right on cue. It's on air, online, and on your smart device, so grab an app to listen anywhere. Anywhere, and I do mean anywhere. At home, maybe on a Grace tabletop digital radio. If you missed Solaris' show with Mary Munoz, and actually, is that the right one? Let me just confirm that again. No, it was Dwight Lilly. Who was I talking about? Dwight Lilly. No, I'm talking about supernatural forces. You know, her show's on before us, and it's fantastic. See, what you want to do is get in the chat room. Only costs $5 a month. That's all it costs. In fact, I subscribe to the archives, and I can listen to anyone's shows. See, Becky and I, we're in Australia, see, and the time slot doesn't really make it work for us. So it's really tough. We do the show live, but I don't get to hear all the other awesome hosts. So that's why I've subscribed to the station. It's awesome. You should do the same. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I live. It's the Dark and Young people. And Mackie?
It's the Daruk people.
Daruk people. And we pay our respects, although I didn't really mean to mock. I was rolling my tongue practice. Our respects to elders past, present and future. Mackie, it feels like it was only yesterday we were talking.
Only yesterday, and in fact it was only yesterday that we were talking, because in fact this is the Halloween special edition of the Shiny Set Out, because Halloween is just around the corner, and I think that's not a bad idea to do. In any event, we were speaking yesterday. We conducted an interview with a friend of the show's who recently produced a movie. That's right, a friend of the show's produced a movie. It's
but due to an NDA, we can't talk about it until the release date.
That is correct. No, that's right. And you will get the interview in a couple of weeks' time, and it's going to be released at that point. But it's interesting. Also, in other news, Solaris has kindly agreed to join us in our 300th show, which is not that far away, around Christmas, guys. We 300 shows. How about that? Very soon we'll have finished our sixth year. For non-native English speaker, the XTH is actually not that easy. So the sixth show, sixth year rather. So that's a long time. We are interested in expanding our portfolio. If anybody out there is interested to produce us, we have a few ideas about some shows. If anybody's listening and has the ready cash, we're happy to take it. We'll let you give it to us. We'll let you. Speaking of letting you give us stuff, this is listener funded radio. It is listener-funded radio. That means that you, all of you, everybody who hears my voice right now, is in fact voting on how successful and how continued this radio station will be by donating your hard-earned money, whatever you can. Or, as Dave likes to say, you can subscribe for a measly $5 to the station archives, and that gives you access to all the great shows. This one, of course, which is okay, I think. This is an okay show, Dave. But other shows, Solaris has a guest every week. Every week, that's right. So you get a very interesting insight into a whole different range of topics. Whereas, for the most part, even though we had some good guests, in fact, fantastic guests, you're mostly stuck with Dave and I in our specific brand of madness. Go ahead,
Becky. I'll tell you, I've been invited to speak at a paranormal conference coming up next week, right before the show.
Ooh.
And I'm going to be speaking about our experiences with all of these top name guests that we've had on.
Nice.
That's awesome. And once again, pro bono comes to mind. So, Meki, there was a very sad thing, and in other news, sadly this week we lost another legend, a legend of rock and roll, Fats Domino.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that our listenership is, we're all around about the same age. It does vary, but we've all got to understand what kind of legend Fats Domino was. And I had my minute silence during the week. I've got to do it. And where this week, in fact this year, on the last show for the year, where the station isn't closed up for Christmas, I wanted to read through the list of people we've lost for this year in memorandum. No,
In memoriam.
In memoriam. Thank you very much. You nearly didn't do it either. So, just to remember them, because I remember there was a prophecy where tons of famous people, all the famous people, when the prophecy was written, it was such a long time ago, they didn't realize how easily famous people can be these days. But it was a significant loss of famous people within a year, and I've been looking, and it was just the same every year. It's the same quantity of people of particular fame, any kind of particular fame that is lost. But it's sad nonetheless. And you know what? I think it's sadder. They say it's sadder when a clown dies. I think it's sadder when someone's brought you joy that they're no longer able to, and think reruns the only thing that you've got left. And I always say, when someone passes away, they'll always be alive if you remember them. And that's the most important thing. So apart from that, because I'm sure, Meki, do you have anything on that topic?
No, look, since we've done or started doing this show 6 years ago, it has become maybe I'm more aware now of people passing.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically in I guess not so much necessarily generally entertainers or people that made a difference in life, but certainly in our field. Some of them we actually spoke to, so we were lucky enough to have that opportunity just to speak to some of those that have passed. But I tell you, it's a big loss when people like that, like Jim and Lloyd and and the others that have passed in these last few years. It's only in the last 2 or 3 years, I think, that has happened more often than not. And it's look, I think that's a good thing. Let's do that. I think it's a good time to reflect. It's a good time to appreciate as well what these people brought to our lives. And I'm like Dave is intending to. We're gonna broaden that scope, obviously, here of people that have had an impact on our lives.
That's a very nice way of putting it. And there's also people that we'd lined up to interview who passed away before we could get to the date we'd organised, isn't it? That's also sad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Look, anyway, I didn't want that as a segue. That's a solid block of information right there, and now we're going to close the lid, and we'll reopen that a bit later in a future episode. I've got two interesting news stories. One sort of carries over from last week's news story, which was the want of US Air Force pilots to be unretired, where the legislation was changed from 25 to 1,500 per month allowance rate of unretirees, if that makes sense. Well, today, it was during the week, and I knew this had a reason. I knew there was a reason for that, and I think I found it. And it's the US Air Force, a news story, preparing B-52 bombers for 24-hour alert status. Now, that seems unremarkable and unsurprising, because wouldn't they always have been? Since, the nuclear, the doomsday clock is 2 minutes to midnight, and it's why not? Why not have it? The bombers on alert, I suppose, right? Just putting that out there. That news story floated to the surface this week, and previous week it was unretiring US Air Force pilots. And does that not form like a pattern in your minds? Because it did in mine, Mackie. Or am I on my
Yes.
own here?
No, look. It is these morsels of information that give you a better understanding of the whole picture. It is these little snippets, right? It's not the big stories, yeah, whatever. It is this story over here, which is they're going to unretire. Let's call it the Air Force personnel. They're gonna have bombers on alert again, and no, they weren't. They actually all. It's doomsday clock, yes, but the United States itself is not on high alert status. The only time the bombers are on standby and all these bases are in high readiness is when the United States is in alert status, readiness deployments and so forth. So that is not the case right now. But it's interesting that the United States would now put bombers on standby. There are a number of obvious reasons why this would be. The most obvious, of course, being the North Korean situation, I like to call it. It's not yet a crisis. Because, look, this person has the ICBM capability. This person has nuclear capability. What we do not know is if he has married the two, because that is not. It's not like putting like duct taping a nuclear device on the top of the ICBM and hoping for the best. Not quite how it works. It also isn't quite how it was in Dr. Strangelove. I don't know if you. It's actually one of my favorite movies. Exactly. The end sequence when the Texan is sitting on top of the H-bomb, riding it down onto the Earth. Not quite like that either. But. It is certainly serious enough. I mean, if because it's not cheap. It's not a cheap exercise to have something on alert. You have to pay people. The machines have to be ready. There's this whole machine and process and deployment apparatus that needs to be geared up for this to occur, and it is not cheap. So therefore, you can always assume that when this happens, it doesn't happen just because someone felt like it. So that's my long-winded answer. So you're not alone, my friend.
Thank heavens for that. Because you know what 24-hour alert status means. It doesn't mean that they're ready. They'll be ready to fly within 24 hours. It means they're ready to fire immediately, around the clock. That's what that means. Just so you don't mistake how important it is for that news to have come out. I was telling people about this before this story broke, because I had someone contact me who said that they're preparing the bombers. The bombers are going. They're actors action at the Air Force bases, and they're recalling people from shore leave. Well, you know what I mean, from leave. Mm-hmm. It's only shore leave if you're in the Navy. So I'm sorry if anyone in the Air Force was offended by a naval term, because I know there's a little bit of rivalry there. Now, that was really interesting that those topics threaded together. But here's an unrelated one. A T-Rex fossil. Becky, I know how much we love discussing fossils and how little that we actually find. But this was really interesting. This is a T-Rex fossil found in Utah, advertised as the most complete fossil ever found. Hear those words, Mackie? Mm-hmm. Ever found. And now I know you don't know what the story is yet, but Mackie, just have a guess how much most complete ever in percent means.
I want to say 26%.
No, it's a little bit higher than that before I can give you a Pepsi.
All right, 27%.
Well, no, they're really quite excited. I'm trying to give you a heads up on this one. They're quite excited by the amount of bones found in a single dig with a single creature. And I'm not talking about the ones that they've found in the La Brea tar pits, because they're just finding piles of bones. They just dredge up bones like there's no tomorrow. But this is in a single dig with a single specimen that's been, obviously instantaneously covered over in a thick mud, so it would remain in place. So it's one of the very few that have kept the skull.
Okay.
Isn't that weird? There's so many T-Rex fossils where there's just no head ever found. Well, they've got a head on this one, which is really, well, most of the head apparently. However, 75% of the fossil was found. And I went, wow, that's what, most complete ever. So you're telling me, out of all the other T-Rex fossils that have ever been found ever, they've never found 3/4 of one before? And obviously the answer is no, they haven't.
Yes.
So they have to extrapolate a whole bunch of information. I reckon they were like big chickens. That's what I reckon. I reckon their head was as fierce as it is, as crunching at it as it is, as severing those teeth are, as the strength of the jaw and everything. I reckon they scratched the soil like a chicken does. Maybe there's things under the soil that required the use of huge teeth, and that the huge teeth, while they're great for penetrating and severing and cutting and doing all the things they did, was more use for what they were digging up than what they were, running after and jumping on and doing the whole predatory bit like we think lions do. Sorry, we know lions do. We think that the T-Rexes do. I was watching my chickens. They've got feet almost exactly the same, with huge nails. What are they used for? Digging. They don't do anything else with it. They don't hunt down prey, unless there's like a
like the velociraptor.
That's right. They don't hunt together, right? They don't do any of those things. So look, it was just a very funny thing, Meki, and I know you were going to love this 75%. That's a huge percentage.
It is actually,
according to what their story was boasting.
Yes,
wow.
You're right.
Wow, we found so many bones all at once.
No, look, it's extraordinary because like we discussed in the past. Fossilization is an extremely unlikely process to happen in the first place. That's why most of the fossils we find are marine fossils. And not only that, the larger the beast, and the Tyrannosaurus rex obviously is a fairly large beast, the less likely even yet, because it's so much of it that has to fossilize, and all of it has to be in just the right place at the right time. So if you've got a small fish that sinks to the bottom there, you can understand how that could work. But if you've got a very large dinosaur, so the entire area where this dinosaur died must have been just the right condition for this fossilization to occur. Not just a leg bone or jaw bone or part of the rib cage, but the entire creature, which again is quite large. So, no, 75%, Dave, that's extraordinary.
So, I knew that's going to be one of those things that we remember forever. Was this thing that is very rare. We never find this quantity. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to do was I wanted to play an audio clip, and you know how you hear often people talking about, oh, that's the devil's music. If you play it backwards, you'll hear devil chanting and worshipping from rock and roll music, Meki. Primarily the accusations come from maybe the more religious person. Okay.
Right.
There's a joke to do with country music, because country music is all about, losing your girl, losing your dog dies, and your car breaks down, and your wife leaves you. And if you play that backwards, your wife comes back, your dog comes alive, and your car starts working. And it's a bit of a joke. However, just like watching a cloud, and we have this pareidolia, which is the term for our imagination making something out of nothing, where the cloud is not intentionally being a face or a dog or a bunny or whatever it is, but we see that shape, and it is, to us, all intents and purposes, a rendition of that object. Okay, so the backwards music component is an audio clip, and astonishingly, the word insomniac played backwards is I must sleep, and I have proof of it. All right, and so I'm going to play it backwards. I'm going to play it forwards and reverse the record backwards, playing the same insomniac word backwards, and you'll hear the term I must sleep. You ready?
Please.
Insomniac, I must sleep. Insomniac, I must sleep. Insomniac, I must sleep. Insomniac,
I have no idea how insomniac turns to I must sleep, but I heard it. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Wow.
So
that's incredible.
That's a classic 1990s track that was probably heard by, I don't know, 5-6 people. In that track, or remembered by 5 or 6 people. In that track, the words, you can hear it said in a particular way, insomniac. It's not insomniac. So I think that they've conditioned the backwards version of that word, which is I must sleep, having heard it backwards, and modified it so that it would work in both directions. By saying it in an animated fashion, the word insomniac, that it happens to perfectly match the words I must sleep. Extraordinary. Who knew? And when there's actually books out on this, pardon me, that when we speak, our true meaning is embedded in backward speak. So you might be all nice and polite with people speaking away, and if someone happened to record that and play it backwards, they may hear, and that's what there's a book out, not mine, someone else's, a book out that describes that the hidden meaning in your intention is in the backwards speak. And if you listen to it backwards, you hear something completely different, a meaning that wasn't portrayed in a forwards version of speaking. That our minds, actually I thought you might like this, that our minds have that ability. Now I'm not saying that I believe it. I think there's a lot more research that has to go into that before I'm going to jump on board with it. But isn't that extraordinary?
It is, and not really, well, not that far-fetched, because of the way that speech is structured, and I think the way speech functions in the framework of our brains. And in fact, it's a very nice segue, of course, to today's continuing topic. But because it is such a complex thing, and we try to, and everything we say is merely an abstract for the true thing. And like we said last week, the map is not the territory, therefore the word is not the actual thing or the meaning. And therefore, why wouldn't the mind have the ability to embed meaning in its reverse order? In fact, it makes perfect sense in a way. To be able to do that, it's because you're communicating what you want to say. You say what you want to say, and there it is. But at the same time, you may not be able, but to help you might not be able to help yourself. You have to also communicate the true meaning, which is then hidden as the reverse speech, right? And maybe our brains can process some of that as it comes to us. So sometimes we get an uneasy feeling about people, right? Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes people are speaking. Right, but you go, oh, well, that doesn't sound right, or oh, don't trust this guy, or whatever, right? So that's is this some inbuilt kind of backwards speech capability? Well, I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying though it's not as far fetched as some people might want to believe. And there are many, and I know the book, and I've seen the research on some of this. I can't remember the term now. Movies have been made about this TV series where the reverse speech is played back, and sometimes it also goes into the white noise, which is slightly different though, phenomenon. So there are related phenomena here around speech, and sometimes the messages that are hidden within that speech. It's nuts. In fact, we should do a show cycle on this. In fact, we will.
Do you know when you mentioned on first contact with someone?
Mm-hmm.
I've been with a lady, and we've met another lady, for instance, in a party situation. There's many people, 20, 30 people at the party, and I've arrived with someone, and they've just said, "I don't like that lady there. I don't like her." And I go, "But you've never met her."
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "She's no good. Don't."
Mm-hmm.
And I go, "What do you mean? What can you possibly have discovered about that person right now? Have you heard something?" "No, I just have a feeling."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's always turned out to be true. It's always turned out. This sixth sense that maybe, I mean, I'm oblivious. I don't know why I'm oblivious, but I'm oblivious to it. And I think ladies have this, maybe turned on more, or they've got a higher sense of it. Mackie, if I take our minds back to the way that we went into the hunters and the gatherers, where all the ladies in the group would look after, I'm not being misogynist, but would look after the children collectively, and the men, when it was full moon or at night time or whenever it was, we'd be hunting, doing the things we did.
Yeah.
So in that group, I think that high sense, the high communication, great color observation, and this sense of unity, maybe that's what it is. Maybe part of that sixth sense is that they're not going to fit into that group. Maybe that's where that warning comes from. Maybe that's how that's derived, or it's how it's developed.
It's possible. I mean, also, there might be other uses for this kind of ability. You're looking after your children, or having a certain. I mean, this is a funny thing, and I'll tell you some stories of my life, and you make of it what you will. I was 5, I think, 5 years old. I was with my friends in the neighborhood. It's a fairly safe neighborhood back then. I mean, who would let 5-year-olds run around by themselves these days?
Everyone did then.
Completely. So I was out all day with my friends, and I was literally 5 or 6 years old. Anyway, 5. I'm pretty sure 5. Anyway, so we're out there, and we're in a neighborhood, and it's like I said, there's not much traffic. It's back in the 70s, Anyway, and I'm jumping on this wall, a tiny little wall. If it's probably 20 centimeters high, but for me it was a big wall. I was only 5, and I try to jump it, but I can't quite clear it. I fall, and I fall in a bad way, and I break my right arm. I didn't know I broke my right arm. I just knew it hurt. I couldn't really move it very well. My father came looking for me because he had a bad feeling. My mother was in Canada, and she had immigrated. That was back in the 60s before I was born. And she had a really strange dream about her mother. And she was in the hospital, and she didn't. And in fact, that's exactly what had happened to my grandmother. And she didn't want to tell my mom, in order not to worry her, and so she wouldn't come back to Germany at that time, because again, it's back in the 60s rather, not that easy to fly around. But anyway, so there are, and I've got other instances of this kind of thing. So there is some kind of sense, some kind of connection between at least people that are related. Probably strongest in twins, and we're going to talk about twin telepathy probably today. So, Dave, this it's like an early warning system, Dave, right? And you're talking about ladies or women in the olden days, hunter-gatherer society. We think that most of the women back then were part of the gathering bit, but who's to say they didn't hunt? But certainly would have been very useful to have this kind of built-in warning system, right? Like a remote viewing kind of thing. so it's completely, in my opinion, related to telepathy or extrasensory perception, because we don't know of any senses that could transmit that information to us. I mean, in the brain, certainly there are probably some organs that we haven't quite yet discovered, which are quite capable of that. And what comes to mind is, of course, the pineal gland. And I think, to your point, that women are specifically tuned into that kind of ability. And I don't know why. But if you go back in time, again, let's go back in time before the patriarchal societies started to arise with the monotheistic gods. Before that, women and men equally shared in the power, and sometimes women were more highly regarded as either, you know, the wise leaders or the priest caste. So in ancient times, it was the women that led, and the remnants that we have today are, of course, the Wiccans, which have, you know, some of the old pagan, as we like to call them, traditions. Pagan just, you know, that just means it predated Christianity, big deal. So women were more highly regarded, and women had more power to some extent as well, because it was also believed that women were more closely in tune with the earth because of their, you know, because of the physical cycles that women go through, you know, the fertility thing and all that. So it's a very, very complex topic that we're only touching on here. But look, Dave, I think there's a very strong case to be made that I think this ability that you mentioned is very strong, or stronger in women than it is in men.
I completely agree. Do you know, just to let everyone know that, like as Meki said earlier, this is listener funded. I want to say, get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. Buy a CD of your favourite host shows for a previous season. Maybe an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents. There's even an option for a seed pack with 75,000 seeds. Just follow the instructions. It's so easy when you donate money to the station. When you donate money to the station, you can opt to receive a gift in return. It's fantastic. Don't forget, if you're not in the continental USA, you may have some import restrictions. So check with your local customs facilities for permission, or just query their websites. If you're in the US, the number to call in is 347-688-2902, or if you have Skype on any of your smart devices, you can call in on Freedom Screen. It's a contact you have to add. If you live in Kentucky, you can pick us up on FM, WZZR 101.3, or anywhere else in the entire universe, as long as you can get the Earth's internet, and that means the ISS can listen to us. Hey, up there in low Earth orbit. TuneIn.com. There's a whole bunch of these. TalkStream Live is a great one. If you actually use TalkStream Live, we can see the stats too, which is fantastic. So that's obviously an option. Freedom Slips have their own mobile app, so go to freedomslips.com for that one. Internet radio, Radio Tuner, there's a whole bunch. Or you can get our app. It's available on both Apple and Android platform. It's in the store there. Look for the words Shiny Side Out. So easy. So Meki, being show 294, I know we've spoken, this is the fourth part in language and telepathy.
Mm-hmm.
What about the parapsychology angle?
Yeah, that's a good question, my friend. So within the field of parapsychology, telepathy is considered to be a form of extrasensory perception, or ESP, which you're probably all familiar with, or anomalous cognition, in which information is transferred through PSI, or, you know, psychic powers. It is often characterized similarly to precognition and clairvoyance. So they're sort of grouped together, you know, obviously clairvoyance and precognition, you know, seeing the future and being able to, I guess, see or even see someone's present and past, which is, you know, what clairvoyance is. Experiments have been used to test for telepathic abilities. Among them, the most well-known are the use of the Zener cards, they're called Zener cards, and the Ganzfeld experiment. Now, there are types of telepathy that parapsychology describes. And there's latent telepathy, formerly known as deferred telepathy, is described as the transfer of information through psi or C with an observable time lag between transmission and reception. So essentially, you send a signal and after a little while you get it, rather than instantaneous communication. Retrocognitive, precognitive, and intuitive telepathy is described as being the transfer of information, once again through C, about the past, future, or present state of an individual's mind to another individual. Emotive telepathy, also known as remote influence or emotional transfer, is the process of transferring kinesthetic sensations through altered states. And finally, superconscious telepathy involves tapping into the superconscious to access the collective wisdom of the human species for knowledge. Now, for us, or most of us, that is the Akashic record, and the most prominent example of use of the Akashic record, of course, is Edgar Cayce, also known as the Sleeping Prophet. And I don't think we've done a show on him yet. And then that's
on the cards.
But absolutely. So the accessing, and I know. So let me just quickly share this with you. So I have actually accessed the Akashic record. I'm pretty sure I have. In a couple of occasions, in fact, where I started talking about stuff I shouldn't have had any clue about with experts in the field, and clearly I could hold my own. I shouldn't have been able to. So somehow I was able to access some information somehow, somewhere, so I didn't look like a dolt. Don't know how. Don't know why, but it's a very interesting experience. Now, of course, that knowledge that I was talking about, I have now. I don't know when I learned it, though. So that was a strange experience. It really was. Dave, what are these methods, though, that we discussed earlier?
Well, the first one we talked about was Zener cards. Now, if you've seen Ghostbusters, the movie, you would have seen Zener cards. They were used by Venkman, who was played by... Oh, what's his name again?
Which one?
Becky? Venkman. Bill Murray.
Well, Venkman, yes. Bill Murray, yeah. That's right.
So Bill Murray was performing an experiment where he was using electrotherapy as a deterrent for getting it wrong. And there was a lovely actress there playing the person who was getting it right, although he was fudging it so she would get it right, probably for his own motives in the script. These cards, there's 5 cards in the set, and they're all unique, similar to the previous one in the previous show we talked about, but these ones are simpler shapes. There's a circle, a cross, 3 wiggly lines that look like waves, possibly a square and a star. They're so unique, and they're also coloured different colours. So if you are maybe a little bit more sensitive towards the colour and the shape or the colour, you'll be more inclined to have that message relayed to you. And as we've discussed earlier, it seems easier to do it within your own language. Client, server to client. So Zener cards are marked with 5 distinct symbols, as I've mentioned. When using them, one individual is designated the sender and the other receiver. The senders select a random card and visualize it. They visualize a symbol on it, while the receiver attempts to determine that symbol using, I'm going to call it, is it Psi or Psi?
Psi, I think it's Psi.
Psi. PSI. So some kind of psychic ability. Statistically, the receiver has around about a 20% chance of randomly guessing the correct symbol. So to demonstrate telepathy, they must repeatedly score a success rate that is significantly higher than 20%. If not conducted properly, this method can be vulnerable to sensory leakage and card counting. So it should be shuffled every single time it's used. Every time you draw one card out, you place it back. You should always shuffle the deck. You heard in a previous show just how immediate any higher than 20% chance or success rate has been attacked. The immediacy of the attack on sensory leakage or other reasons why, rather than accepting those figures as fact. Oh, it can't be possible, Mackie. You can't have people who are telepathic. Clearly, that's going to ruin my tenure and my next grant.
That's right.
J.B. Rhine's experiments with Zener cards were discredited due to the discovery that sensory leakage or cheating could account for all of his results, such as the subject being able to read the symbols from the back of the card and being able to see and hear the experimenter to note the subtle clues. So, once Rhine took precautions in response to criticisms of his methods, he was unable to find any high-scoring subjects. Due to the methodological problems, parapsychologists no longer utilize card-guessing studies.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Now, if you remember, we did share with you an experiment or paper that was written by the university, by scholars from the University of Micronesia, where the results, and there were Zener-like cards. In fact, one of the cards was a Zener card. The others, actually two of them were Zener cards. The others were not. And there were 8 cards. And what they found was an extraordinary success rate in that. So, look, I think, in my opinion, the jury is still out on the success of these types of experiments. Because we're dealing with something that can't be dissected in the lab, Dave. It can't be measured, it can't be weighed. The scientific method might not necessarily completely apply here because it is such a non-physical phenomenon, right? It really isn't that easy to study. And who knows? I mean, the thing is this: if telepathy is real, then there might be interference as well. Which might account for poor results. I mean, you can twist it either way. In my opinion, you can say, "Oh, the reason you get poor performance is because there's no telepathy." Or I might say, "Well, the reason we get poor performance in these tests is because telepathy is very strong, and there's a lot of interfering communication going on at the same time as the test is run."
Could you imagine this, Mackie? Could you imagine if the tester themselves was in disbelief that it worked as being a disruptor of the signal because they don't want it to be there?
Yeah. So put it in a context for you as well. Like, let's say you've got 100 people in a room and they're all talking to each other, or 200 people, like at a cocktail party, right? And you're standing at one end of the room, which is maybe 50 meters across, and your conversation partner is standing at the other side of the room. So there's all this conversation going on between you, and you are now trying to have a conversation across the room. Not likely, right? Just to put it in context. Now we're going to talk about dream telepathy. And apparently there were some parapsychological studies carried out into dream telepathy at the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York, and that was led by Stanley Krippner and Montague Allman. They conclude the results from some of the experiments supported dream telepathy. However, the results have not been independently replicated. There you go, that's part of the scientific method, of course. You do something, you do it successfully, someone else has to be able to do it as well. The psychologist James Alcock has written the dream telepathy experiments at Maimonides have failed to provide evidence for telepathy, and lack of replication is rampant. Well, someone should replicate it. That's what I say. Why doesn't James Alcock replicate it? And whatever. The picture target experiments that were conducted by Krippner and Allman were criticized by C.E.M. Hansel. According to Hansel and Gretel, not Gretel, no, I'm just being facetious. There were weaknesses in the design of the experiments in the way in which the agent became aware of the target picture. Only the agent should have known the target and no other person until the judging of targets had been completed. However, an experimenter was with the agent when the target envelope was opened. Hansel also wrote there had been poor controls in the experiment as the main experimenter could communicate with the subject. So what they're alleging here, of course, is fraud. That's what the underlying allegation is. An attempt to replicate the experiments that used picture targets was carried out by Edward Belvedere and David Fawkes. The finding was that neither the subject nor the judges matched the targets with dreams above chance level. Results from other experiments by Belvedere and Folks were also negative. David.
The Ganzfeld experiment. When using the Ganzfeld experiment to test for telepathy, one individual is designated the receiver and is placed inside a controlled environment where they are deprived of sensory input. And another is designated the sender and is placed in a separate location. This is what they did, Meki, by the way, with Uri Geller.
Yeah.
If you didn't know this experiment, if your listeners don't. The receiver is then required to receive information from the sender. The nature of the information may vary between experiments. So this isn't using the Zener cards, could be anything. The Ganzfeld experiment studies that were examined by Ray Hyman and Charles Honiton had methodological problems that were well documented. Honiton reported only 36% of the studies were duplicate target sets of pictures to avoid handling cues. The handling cues. Hyman discovered flaws in all of the 42 Ganzfeld experiments, and to access each experiment, he devised a set of 12 categories of flaws. 6 of these concerned statistical defects. The other 6 covered procedural flaws, such as inadequate documentation. That's an easy shot, isn't it? Randomization and security, as well as possibilities of sensory leakage. Once again, here's the sensory leakage again. Over half of the studies failed to safeguard against sensory leakage, and all of the studies contained at least one of the 12 flaws. Because of the flaws, Honiton agreed with Hyman the 42 Ganzfeld studies could not support the claim for existence of psi. Possibilities of sensory leakage in the Ganzfeld experiments included the receivers hearing what was going on in the sender's room next door, as the rooms were not soundproofed, and the sender's fingerprints to be visible on the target object for the receiver to see. Hyman also reviewed the Otto Ganzfeld experiments and discovered a pattern in the data that implied a visual cue may have taken place. The most suspicious pattern was the fact that the hit rate for the given target increased with the frequency of occurrence of that target in the experiment. So that means the more times that target was presented, the more times it was guessed. The hit rate for the targets that occurred only once was right at the chance of expectation, around about 25%. For targets that appeared twice, the hit rate crept up to 28%. For those that occurred 3 times, it was 38%. And those targets that occurred 6 or more times, the hit rate was 52%. It sounds to me as though that just the guessing that was the object made the hit rate increase.
Well, it's not just that, but in my opinion, so let's say each target only occurs once, and there you go. That's the hit rate is 25%, whatever. However, if you have the same targets reappear, could it not be? And I'm not saying it is, but could it not be that the signal becomes stronger somehow? Mm-hmm. Could it not be that because none of us are trained telepaths, like we're just not. We do need to warm up, I dare say. I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying that's what it is, right? Sorry, keep going.
No, Meki, I'm completely with you. You know, we already know in the brain, the more times you remember something, the more you'll remember it, and for the length of time, a greater length of time.
Yes.
Because it combines synapses which make it stronger. Like that synapse path records the route. Mm-hmm. So each time a videotape is played, its quality can degrade. Is it plausible then that when a frequently used clip is the target for a given session, it may physically distinguishable from the other 3 decoy clips that are presented to the subject for judging? Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, the parapsychology community has not taken this finding seriously. They still include the Otto Ganzfeld series in their meta-analysis and treat it as convincing evidence for the reality of psi. That's good. Please continue the convincing evidence. Meki.
Hyman, yeah. I'm here. Yeah. Hyman wrote the Otto-Ganzfeld experiments were flawed because they did not preclude the possibilities of sensory leakage. In 2010, Lance Storm, Patrizio Trasoldi, and Lorenzo Di Risio analyzed 29 Ganzfeld studies from 1997 to 2008. Of the 1,498 trials, 483 produced hits, corresponding to a hit rate of 32.2%. This hit rate is, in fact, statistically significant, with P, or confidence interval, being less than 0.01. Participants selected for personality traits and personal characteristics thought to be C or C conducive were found to perform significantly better than unselected participants in the Ganzfeld condition. Hyman, in 2010, published a rebuttal to Storm and compatriots. According to Hyman, reliance on meta-analysis as the sole basis for justifying the claim that an anomaly exists and that the evidence for it is consistent and replicable is fallacious. It distorts what scientists mean by confirmatory evidence. Hyman wrote, the Ganzfeld studies have not been independently replicated and have failed to produce evidence for telepathy. Storm et al. Published a response to Hyman claiming the Ganzfeld experimental design has proved to be consistent and reliable, but parapsychology is a struggling discipline that has not received much attention, so further research on the subject is necessary. Rauder, 2013, wrote that critical evaluation of Storm et al.'s meta-analysis reveals no evidence for telepathy, and the 2016 paper examined questionable research practices in the Ganzfeld experiments. Don't go away, we have twin telepathy after the break.
Listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with David Meki's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5 a month, as I've already mentioned. I'd like to say hello to all the new listeners we have today. So if you just joined us this week and discovered Revolution Radio, guess what? You're with friends. It's all good. This is a fantastic place. If you're following us, or you've liked our pages, or you've been to our website, or whatever you are, wherever you have been, I hope that we bring you information. I hope that information is pertinent to you, and if you're able to, we hope we lay out the stepping stones for you to be able to get to where we are. Now, we're not all that far away from everybody. We've just made that journey ourselves. This is nearly 6 years on air here at Revolution Radio, and while Meki and I have at least 50 years worth of research under our belts each already, and I dare say it's probably nearly 100 years of research under our belts together, combined. It's a great place to be. And Meki, I have to say, look, we're halfway through Shoe. What a great shoe!
Well, it's the best shoe. It's the best shoe.
This is show 294, and a lot of people ask me, how do you sleep at night, knowing all the things you know and seeing all the things you see and bringing all that information out to everybody? I said, because all of the stuff that we talk about is happening on a layer above us. It doesn't happen directly to us. It happens on a layer above. It happens in the elite layer. It happens in the corporates and the political and the governments, and it happens up there. It doesn't happen to the front line. I was talking to some people, Meki, and they said, all this stuff going on, my life hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. In all of that war on terror and all those things that are going on in the world. I said, well, that's right. Mm-hmm. Can you concentrate on that part of it? Don't worry about it. Two things. If you can't change it, and there is no way of changing, and it's outside of your control, then don't. Don't worry. Have a plan. If you need to make a plan, make a plan. Make a plan that will get your family through something. Like, I live in a bushfire area, and I know a lot of people in my friend circle that says, you're mad living there. I said, well, I've made a plan. I plan to live here. I plan to make a house out of non-combustible materials, almost entirely, except for the furnishings inside. And I've protected it, and I've got a water tank, and I've got a fire hose and finals, and I've got a water pump, and I've got everything that I need to protect myself. I've also registered the tank with the local fire service. They've been to my house. They've looked at what their resources will be in the case of an emergency. And they've said that's a fantastic place. Well done. In fact, it's so safe they could set up there. So if you do things right, and you make your right plans, you're going to be at least a step ahead of everybody else who's experiencing the same issue.
Yeah, preparedness, guys. Preparedness.
That's what it's all about.
It's no point, going, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, fret. Because I need to say this before we keep going. We all are existing in the eternal now. Rightly or wrongly, that's where we are. We spend most of our time worrying about the past. I mean, what's the point? And the rest of our time fearing, or living in fear of the future. So you worry about the past, or you regret the past, and then you worry about the future, or you fear the future. No point. Because guess what? It'll be in the now when it happens to you, right? So I always like to say, that's future Mackie's problem. Something goes wrong, cleaning it up is going to be future Mackie's problem, knowing full well, of course, that future Mackie is going to catch up with me real soon. So, guys, make the plans. All right, don't fret. Make the best plans that you can. I don't know, in anything in life, really, right? This doesn't just speak to natural disasters or catastrophic situations. It's a good life plan to be prepared. Interview. I mean, if you've got a job interview, you want to prepare for that, I think, right? That's not a bad idea. If you are, in fact, want to be a doctor, then I would suggest you study medicine. That's a good plan. Okay, and nothing. In fact, everything in life is like that. There's nothing that's different. I mean, make your plans. Do your thing. Will it change? Will your plans change? Will circumstances change? Yes, absolutely, they will. And your plans might not come to fruition. That's okay. Make other plans. Do something else. But don't stand still and don't be caught by this paralysis of fear, both of the past and the future. No point in doing that, because your now will catch up to you. Because while you worry about the past and you worry about the future and all that stuff, you're going to miss right now. It's going to completely bypass you. And you look back at your life and go, I've lived in fear of the future, of the past. I've never really experienced the moment. That's not very good. Do martial arts. It'll teach you about that. Now, sorry, that was...
You're sounding more and more like a life coach every time I talk to you.
Yeah, maybe. You know what? The outlook on life changes when you have children. Oh, you know this, though, Dave. That's the truth. And my mind is bent that way. Most Germans have this deep-seated need to educate. it's a pathological thing with Germans. But let's talk about twin telepathy. And I would like to before I do though, I would like to say this about telepathy and similar phenomena. It is, or they are rather, not easily studied phenomena. They're not easily dissected or replicated because they are completely non-physical, at least, we think. I mean, there might be a physical dimension to it. We just haven't figured it out yet. And therefore, we might need to have a different approach. I know I've been advocating this for ever now, but the scientific method may just not be the right thing here. Because it may not be the same all the time. What I mean by that is, look at the tides. I mean, the water comes in, the water goes out. If we didn't connect it to the moon, we'd have no clue why that happens, right? But why connect it to the moon? The moon is so far away. It doesn't make any sense. The moon can't be responsible for the tides. but we understand gravity now. Well, sorry, we understand that gravity exists.
The idea of gravity.
Correct, and therefore we have figured out. Well, actually, the moon is pulling the oceans this way and that way, right? As it makes its way around the Earth. So we have expanded our understanding and our scope of observation, right? And I would like you to think about this in a similar way, because if you just look at the water coming in and out, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Well, it's coming out, coming in. Well, I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. I can't explain it.
It's not the same height every time either.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. The tides vary, right? So, simple example. So phenomena like telepathy and others, there are many others like it. We might have to expand our scope of observation, our scope of understanding in order to fully appreciate what we're dealing with here, right? And again, I would like to put forward the thought that telepathy, pure telepathy, is a non-verbal, a non-language-based form of communication. That's really, really important to understand. And in fact, when the experiment, and I'm so glad I found it, the experiment that we shared with you from the University of Micronesia completely validates that thought, because only same language speakers could communicate successfully telepathically, or whatever you want to call it. Whereas people that spoke two different languages, nothing, zero, complete random. It didn't have any statistically significant results at all, none. But the problem, of course, is, and I know I've said this before, is that our brains and our minds have now been completely metricized, or put into a matrix of language, and that's how we think, that's how we talk, that's how our whole thought process and structure works around language and words and grammatical structures, even, right? Whereas let's imagine a mind completely untouched by the structure of language, but able to think in pure thoughts and concepts and experiences and emotions, and then the ability to transmit those. That's what I'm talking about here, right? So twin telepathy. Twin telepathy is a belief that has been described as a myth in psychological literature. Psychologists Stephen Hupp and Jeremy Jewell have noted that all experiments on the subject have failed to provide any scientific evidence for telepathy between twins. Now, obviously, what Dave and I have been doing here so far for today has been sharing the official line on telepathy. According to Hupp and Jewell, there are various behavioral and genetic factors that contribute to the twin telepathy myth. Identical twins typically spend a lot of time together and are usually exposed to very similar environments. Thus, it's not at all surprising that they act in similar ways and are adept at anticipating and forecasting each other's reactions to events. That's a fair statement. A 1993 study by Susan Blackmore investigated the claims of twin telepathy. In an experiment with 6 sets of twins, one subject would act as the sender and the other as the receiver. The sender was given selected objects, photographs, or numbers, and would attempt to psychically send the information to the receiver. The results from the experiment were negative. No evidence of telepathy was observed. The skeptical investigator Benjamin Radford has noted that despite decades of research trying to prove telepathy, there is no credible scientific evidence that psychic powers exist, either in the general population or among twins specifically. The idea that two people who shared their mother's womb, or even who share the same DNA, have a mysterious mental connection is an intriguing one, not borne out in science. Now, 2 points I need to make before I hand it
too.
I know, good. Then I hand it to you, my esteemed co-host. Now, one, quantum entanglement, is, I'm going to say this here, right? Twins are probably as close as we're going to get to quantum entangled human beings, in my opinion. And secondly, we are asking people to think at someone. Now, how can I put this best? Do you remember? And I think I might have made use of this example before. But back in the 90s, maybe the noughties, there were these pictures. They were running. I can't find them anymore, but they were everywhere. There were pictures, but the regular size of a portrait or something you would hang on your wall, and it was complete nonsense. Like it didn't make any sense. It's a random. It looked like a random selection of blobs, repeating blobs. So if you looked at it with your focused vision, you could see nothing but random pieces of color. If you unfocused your eyes, which took a bit of doing, by the way, a lot of people couldn't do it, and sort of see past the focal point of the picture, a picture would emerge within that jumbled mess of dots. A ship or a bird or whatever. But you had to unfocus your vision. Do you remember those pictures, Dave?
Yeah, they're called magic eye images.
Magic eye. That's right, magic eye images. Now, what if? And again, it's a big what if. What if telepathy worked in the same fashion? The harder we try to be telepathic, the harder it is to do it. Right? It's when you're trying to think of something. It's the tip of your tongue, and the more you think about it, the more it escapes you. Or the reverse. The more you try not to think about pink elephants, the more pink elephants will clutter your mind. So maybe we have to be able to relax our mind rather than try to focus to send words at someone or images at someone. Maybe telepathy has to be or can only be achieved in a state of relaxation of the mind, not in a stress or focused state. I don't know, but I'm just putting that out there. Sorry, Dave.
That's okay. I've found a whole bunch of the images and I've sent you a link, Mickey.
Right,
so
got it. Yep.
You can enjoy them. I had one of the posters on my wall, and my cousin had one. And even when I walked past the store when they were first released, I could see them. I'd always performed that trick of defocusing or unfocusing my eyes when I would stare at the toilet tiled floor, because it was a similar pattern, and I made the two images overlap over each other, and it would cause the same effect as the magic eye. So I was doing it before the poster came out. When the poster came out, I could just see them straight away. Extraordinary. So yeah, I like that. The quote, Mickey. You're absolutely right. One thing that I wanted to mention here with twins is the anecdotal evidence from every parent of twins. The anecdotal information that's come from the parents has been, in almost every case that I've spoken one-to-one with the parents, they have said unequivocally, making no beans about it, they've said from birth they could communicate with each other in a way that didn't use words. Even as babies, they could communicate to each other. So as babies without words, Mickey, as babies without a construct of language, they were able to pass each other things and satisfy each other.
Yep.
You know, one's crying, the other one, has got something, and it goes, well, I could just give it to you. I'll just give it to you because I know that's what you want. And that kind of thing has, even when twins are separated at birth, for whatever reason, given to different parents, they grow similarly, they grow their haircuts the same, and not because of style at the time. I wore an onion in my belt.
Because the Kaiser stole them all!
All the white ones. All right. But because they had similar interests, they did all these things, and not always because they had a propensity towards something. Yeah? Not because they had a fast brain so they'd be good at video games, or they had good reaction times so they were fast sprinters. No, odd things that didn't rely on any of those inputs. So, but when they met each other, they said it was like they've never been apart.
Yeah.
So that's a direct quote from twins. And now I think this twin telepathy business, was just an attempt to disprove it, so that it could go down in the book saying there's no such thing as telepathy. And because they don't want us to think that their telepathy is real, they would prefer us to, just tuck it away, it doesn't exist, don't worry about it. Maybe the emotional state of the sender is very important. If you could promote that in a way that made it an active sender, or maybe they're subconsciously doing it in a way that it turns it off. And so there isn't any proof of this, only because of that reason. Or maybe it's just the wrong thing. Like you said, they're trying to construct it with words, and the words don't mean anything. Because then the twins have also stated that they've felt an emotional depression. At the same time, the other one is feeling that depression for no reason, because their life is awesome. There shouldn't be any reason for it, but there is, and they are connected. And I think the quantum entangled person is real. I think they're on the same wavelength, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
They're on the same channel. If another way of thinking about it, I think two people in love are harmonizing.
Yes, good point actually there. Excellent point.
That's what I think. They harmonize. They're resonating that feeling, that exact feeling, and it's the power is beyond the sum of the two. And I think that's a magical experience. If you only get it a few times in your life, they say, Maggie, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the truth. Yeah.
So I remember experiencing a very similar connection with someone, and I knew when they were in the country and when they left the country. I knew when they were distant. If that's just the kind of things that happen. So twin telepathy, I think it's real. I think this. I know we're reading the accepted reality from the powers that be. That's what we're doing. Yes. But I want to say, like our listeners, I want to be I'm on their side. We're on their side with this. And so scientific reception. I love this. A variety of tests have been performed to demonstrate telepathy, but there is no scientific evidence that the powers exist. A panel commissioned by the United States National Research Council, the USNRC, to study paranormal claims concluded that despite a 130-year record of scientific research on such matters, our committee could not find anything, no scientific justification for the existence of the phenomena, such as extrasensory perception, mental telepathy, or mind over matter exercises. Evaluation of a large body of the best available evidence simply does not support the contention that these phenomena exist. Mackie, I just wanted, before I read another word, I wanted to say something. Remember how we talked about being a psychokinesis. So there's telekinesis and psychokinesis. These are real terms. They're real terms in medical journals. So telekinesis is the ability to move something with your mind, move an object with intention. You intended to move it and it moved. Psychokinesis, and I want you to remember these terms. Psychokinesis is when the subject moved something unintentionally with their mind. Now, imagine how freaked out you would be if you walked into a room and all the chairs moved away from the table and went to the walls. Yeah? For the dining table in the middle of a room. They all just departed the table. And you would say, poltergeist, I'm packing, I'm selling a house, forget it, that's it, I'm out of here, I don't want this anymore. Right? But you didn't know it was you that did it. That's psychokinesis, when you're unaware that you've moved something. So when I hear these council members, the committee members saying there's no evidence, there's nothing, forget it, doesn't exist, and I have to laugh, because I don't know what window of the car they're looking out of, but it's not the front window where all the action's happening. All right. The scientific community considers parapsychology as pseudoscience. There is no known mechanism for telepathy. Philosopher and physicist Mario Bunge has written that telepathy would contradict laws of science, and the claim that signals can be transmitted across space without fading with distance is inconsistent with physics. Well,
incorrect.
I'm going to say, Mario, you're an idiot. And I'm saying that on air. I'm saying that. I make that claim.
I'm with
As you make the claim it doesn't exist. Because what's quantum entanglement, Mackie?
That's exactly what it is. In fact,
Spooky action at a distance makes no
we-
difference
yeah.
how far away it is. He's an idiot.
completely.
He must science all day.
Maybe he must be a good sciencer.
Okay. Oh
Sorry.
wow! It just does my head in. So they obviously found someone who didn't believe it existed, and they got him to quote it. Physicist John Taylor has written the experiments that have been widely claimed by parapsychologists to support evidence for the existence of telepathy are based on the use of shaky statistical analysis and poor design. Oh, the experiment was rubbish.
Yep.
That's my quote. And attempts to duplicate such experiments by the scientific community have failed. You see, because it's not science, you see, and that's where I think they're falling down.
Yes.
Taylor also wrote the arguments used by parapsychologists for the feasibility of such phenomena are based on distortions of the theoretical physics, as well as complete ignorance of the relevant areas of physics.
Hang on, like the ignorance displayed by Mario Bunge. Is that the ignorance? I don't know. Is that the ignorance we're talking about?
Well, it's very similar indeed.
Come on. I mean, I'm sorry. That's just not cricket, is it? Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. I'm up then. A psychologist, Stuart Sutherland, wrote that cases of telepathy can be explained by people underestimating the probability of coincidences. I'm sorry, it's getting funny. According to Sutherland, most stories about this phenomenon concern people who are close to one another, husband and wife, or brother and sister. Since such people have much in common, it is highly probable that they will sometimes think the same thoughts at the same time. No argument. That's not really what we're talking about, though. Graham Reed, a specialist in anomalistic psychology, or abnormal psychology, I guess, and noted that experiments in telepathy often involve the subject relaxing and reporting the messages to consist of colored geometric shapes. Reed wrote that these are a common type of hypnagogic image and not evidence for telepathic communication. So I'll explain to you what that means in a second. Outside the parapsychology, telepathy is generally explained as the result of fraud, self-delusion, and or self-deception, and not as a paranormal power. Psychological research has also revealed other explanations such as confirmation bias, expectancy bias, sensory leakage, subject validation, and wishful thinking. Now, let's take a breather here. You know that the military, in the Cold War especially, spent gazillions on telepathy and paranormal phenomena? They did. They actually did. Let's just put this in perspective. People have spent, the military folk, who are not the cuddliest people in the world, right? They have done this. Virtually all of the instances of more popular psychic phenomena, such as mediumship, can be attributed to non-paranormal techniques, such as cold reading. That's just essentially the ability to really, really read someone's body language really, really, really well. Magicians such as Ian Rowland and Darren Brown have demonstrated techniques and results similar to those of popular psychics, without paranormal means. They have identified, described, and developed psychological techniques of cold reading and hot reading. And the answer is yes, of course you can. Of course you can, right? It doesn't mean the other thing does not exist. Just because something else exists doesn't mean the other thing does not exist. I hope you understand.
Oh, that was tough.
Right? No, it's I mean, but sorry, psychiatry, Dave. What does psychiatry tell us?
Psychiatry, the notion of telepathy is not dissimilar to two clinical concepts: delusions of thought, insertion/removal. This similarity might explain how individuals, or an individual, might come to the conclusion that they were experiencing telepathy. Okay, so they've got delusions of thought, but maybe insertion removal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thought insertion/removal is a symptom of psychosis, particularly of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or substance-induced psychosis. Psychiatric patients who experience this symptom falsely believe that some of their thoughts are not their own, and that others, for example, other people, aliens, demons, or fallen angels, or conspiring intelligence agencies, are putting thoughts into their minds. Thought insertion. Some patients feel as if thoughts are being taken out of their minds or deleted. Thought removal, that is. Along with other symptoms of psychosis delusions of thought insertion may be reduced by antipsychotic medication. You mean the medication that turns off your psychic abilities?
Bingo.
Yeah. Psychiatrists and clinical psychologists believe that empirical findings support the idea that people with schizotype or personality disorder are particularly likely to believe in telepathy. Hang on, Mickey. They're making a broad claim here that if you believe that telepathy is real, you're psychotic.
And in fact, yes, not just any old psychotic, but you actually
schizophrenic.
Well, you've got a schizotypal personality disorder. Now, yes, it is. It is an extremely. And the funny thing is this: we've had other shows, and of course, we have spoken to Solaris, who's very well versed in this particular subject matter, about the I guess artificial telepathy and so forth. So the question here is. Can we simply state that? So if somebody has an experience in their life, like whatever it is, and that experience is different from everybody else's experience, can we categorically say that this person's experience is simply an illusion, a hallucination? They made it up. Their brain doesn't function well. There's a chemical imbalance, whatever you want to call it. I don't care what it is. But this person's experience of reality, because it is different from yours, must be wrong. So. Let me again, a simple example here, and you can of course disagree here, everybody. If everybody in the world was blind, everybody blind, and one person could see, and if you're blind, you're still functional, right? I mean, you just do things differently. Some people can actually move via echo sound. I've seen documentaries on that. So you can still function as a human being. I mean, there are creatures in the world that are completely blind. Especially if you go down into caves, you find creatures that have no eyes because no need, because no light. But they live their lives and they get along. So the example here is not that far-fetched. So let's say everyone in the world is blind. There's one person though can see. And maybe there are a couple of people that can see here, there, occasionally. What do you think the blind people would do to those people? Obviously, they're completely deluded, right? They're having some kind of schizoid episode of seeing. What do you mean? What does that even mean, seeing things?
Yeah,
what does that
I'm with you. If the tables are turned.
So that person then, that seeing person, because their experience of reality is fundamentally different from everybody else's, would be locked up and called, or would be diagnosed with some kind of schizotypal personality disorder.
They'd be given a medicine that stops them from.
So, and this is really the problem. And it's in a way, it's the same, because these people, and I'm not saying that schizophrenia and psychosis aren't real things, and I'm sure there are people that are suffering from chemical imbalance in the brain damage and things like that. Of course that exists. In fact, I know people who suffer from drug-induced psychosis, and I knew them before they became that way, and I knew them after. It's a switch, night and day. It's a completely different person. So I'm aware that this exists. What I am saying is that not all of it is necessarily a disorder, a mental disorder, a brain damage disorder, whatever you want to call it. I believe, and this is the thing, guys, all these things like psychosis or schizophrenia or whatever else it might be that they say you have, these are spectrum disorders, like autism, spectrum disorders, meaning you exist on a spectrum of severity of that disorder, or a spectrum of symptoms. So not all symptoms in a psychotic person are the same from to the next person, and so on and so forth. It's just these are spectrum disorders. So I'm just saying here that some of these people, maybe they're not schizophrenic, they're not psychotic, but what they experience is actually a reality. Crazy, not because they're experiencing it, because no one believes them. So what if the government, and we know now, of course, we know that the government has the technology to put thoughts into your mind. We know this. It's come on. We've had many shows about this. We've spoken about these weapons. We've spoken about, maybe, in fact, I'll dig up and for next week and I'll just bring up the some of these patents that people have put together, right? And I'm talking about, like being able to influence people's thoughts and such. So let's be very clear here that this is the thing.
Well, I want to add something.
Please,
so
please.
This psychotronic is one way where there's a frequency and they can tune into you, and Solaris talks about handlers and alphabet agency stuff. However, the first time I ever heard of someone being able to hear something in their head was mechanical. Bill Gates' house, for instance, when you walk around, you hear music that isn't being played audibly anywhere in the room. Tracking devices will beam microwaves at your head. Oh, it's not microwave, it's the other one. Ultrasonic waves at your head, which resonate with your receptors, and you hear the music playing, the music of your desire. In fact, to visit Bill Gates' house, there was an online questionnaire. What art do you like? What music do you like? And so when you walked around the house, the art would change if you were in front of it. When you're seeing it, it would be that was back in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. Think about what they've got now.
Oh, look, we've any of what we know. I mean, today, any of the technologies that the military has, the elite has access to, the billionaires, if you will, like just when I say public sector, I mean government. I mean out in the world, just us folk, right? It's way ahead of that. It's way ahead of that. And the reason for that, of course, is that you have to believe it or not. The reason we are behind, or one of the major reasons we are behind in our technology and scientific, I guess scientifically based products that we could purchase potentially, is because we have to actually sell all the stuff that's in between. So we have to sell it, right? So somebody has to buy all the stuff that's old before the new stuff can come out. That's why you have sales. We see, it's so much, it's so cheap now, I'm going to buy this TV. Look at that. And then next week, the TV they bring out is like, 50 generations ahead of what you had, and so much better. You kick yourself for not having bought it. It's held back from us, like Dave says. Now, I did want to share a term with you, which you mentioned earlier, hypnagogia. Hypnagogia is the experience of the traditional state from wakefulness to sleep in humans, the hypnagogic state of consciousness during the onset of sleep. Essentially, mental phenomena that occur during this threshold consciousness, I love this term threshold consciousness because I think that's exactly what it is, include lucid thought, lucid dreaming, hallucinations, and of course our old favorite, sleep paralysis. So that's hypnagogia. I wanted to explain that term to you guys because we don't like to use just big words. So look at that, they use big words. Which brings us, Dave, to and we're going to share this, by the way. I'm not going to read it all by myself. Quantum pseudo telepathy, quantum pseudo telepathy. Now, this particular article uses quantum theoretical concepts and terminology. And if you wanted to read more about quantum mechanics, there's a link to the introduction of quantum mechanics in the show notes. Quantum pseudo-telepathy is a phenomenon in quantum game theory resulting in anomalously high success rates in coordination games between separated players. These high success rates would require communication between the players in a purely classical, non-quantum world. However, the game is set up such that during the game, communication is physically impossible. This means that for quantum pseudo-telepathy to occur prior to the game, the participants need to share a physical system in an entangled quantum state, and during the game have to execute measurements on this entangled state as part of the game strategy. Games in which the application of such a quantum strategy leads to pseudo-telepathy are also referred to as quantum non-locality games. Dave?
In their 1999 paper, Gilles Brassard and Richard Cleve and Alain Tapp demonstrated that winning quantum strategies can exist in simple games for which, in the absence of a quantum entanglement, a winning strategy can result only if the participants were allowed to communicate. The term quantum pseudo-telepathy was later introduced for this phenomenon. The prefix pseudo is appropriate, as the quantum non-locality effects that are at the heart of the phenomenon do not allow any transfer of information, but rather eliminate the need to exchange information between the players for achieving a mutual win in the game. The phenomenon of quantum pseudo-telepathy is mostly used as a powerful and explicit thought experiment of the non-local characteristics of quantum mechanics, yet the effect is real and subject to experimental verification, as demonstrated by the experimental confirmation of the violation of the Bell inequalities.
Now, Dave, so let's be clear here. And this is really what quantum entanglement is all about. It's right. They're right in saying you're not communicating per se. That's not what quantum entanglement is, because communication traditionally means an elapse of time. There's an interval of time that elapses for the communication to occur. This particular communication is instantaneous, so the information is not sent or received. The information simply exists in both ends, or at both ends of this entangled particle, whatever the case may be. So there's no transmission, there's no reception of this information. It simply exists at both ends of the potential communicative array at the same time, without having been communicated. So the act of communication doesn't actually occur. Do you know what I mean? So it simply is. It simply is. And as we've just read here, it's experimentally verifiable, this exchange of communication. So, and here we're gonna join a few dots, and please bear with me. We've shared an article with you recently that denotes that the brain, in fact, is or exists in a quantum state or in quantum states. And experimentally, it was shown that up to 11 higher dimensions are being utilized by brain functions. That's what the experiment had, and then we shared that with you. So we can therefore say that our brains are quantum devices, for want of a better word. If that is so, is it then impossible to think of our brains as having the ability to become entangled? Or maybe they are entangled from birth. Maybe the Akashic record is in fact the entangled state of all brains, of all minds. Right? And the brain is really just a physical vehicle here. I'm talking about the minds now, right? Now, if that is all true, then telepathy is no longer a hypothetical, it's a necessity. Telepathy is no longer just something that we think might exist, but it must exist. The instantaneous transfer of information. That's what quantum entanglement is. If the brain is a quantum device that may very well, be capable of entanglement, then telepathy, or a variant thereof, is a necessary thing. It is no longer a potential thing. It is a necessary thing. Are you guys with me? Hopefully, I haven't lost too many of you. Right. So and this is really where it gets all very strange, because again, quantum mechanics, and we've spoken about quantum mechanics a lot, is completely counterintuitive. Right? It goes against scientific method, in fact, to some extent. I mean, well, no, so that's not true. It goes against classical science. But scientific method has been used to verify the experiments within quantum mechanics. So they're repeatable. We have no idea why the things that happen. None. Zero. We can do the experiment, and my favorite one is obviously double slit. We do the experiment. That is, it can be done. It can be done again and again a million times with the same exact results. We have no clue, though, right? If you want to frame it in purely classical scientific terms, why the thing that happens. None. Zero. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. We don't know. Why would an outcome be different, under this set of circumstances as opposed to this set of circumstances? Makes no difference. We think. Clearly, it makes a massive difference. We just don't understand why it does. So now that we have sufficiently entangled, enmeshed the paranormal phenomena with quantum mechanics and science, I think we are now understanding, hopefully, that one cannot separate the disciplines. One cannot simply say, this is where science is, and it's in this box, and over here quantum mechanics, and then I've got the paranormal events, they're over here, and then everything else is over there. That's not how the world works. The world doesn't box things up. We do. We put things in boxes, Dave. The world doesn't. The world is just the way it is. There it is. There's the world. Enjoy. But it doesn't present itself neatly in boxes. It doesn't. And that's really the problem, right? I don't know, Dave. Do you think that kind of thinking did I make it accessible? Is that easy to follow? Maybe you can help our listenership to grasp it more clearly.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. That we've proved the quantum entanglement component is something that physics are looking at as part of telepathy. That we're able to utilize the same effect, and that it's real, and that it's subject to experimental verification. That is what is going on. Well, it's perceived now that we know about quantum mechanics that may be very well the case of how it's all occurring. However, Mackie, I know that we've spoken about the mind-body problem.
Yes.
All right, and that's coming up in this next piece. We've only got 10 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we can get through this, and I think when we do this, it's going to solidify everything for everybody.
Okay, cool. Let's do it.
So this is Mackie's slight sidestep, the extended mind. And it's an interesting concept. I'll take the first paragraph, Mackie, you drive it, right? The paper, The Extended Mind, by Andy Clark and David Chalmers, this is from 1998, in a seminal work in the field of extended cognition. In this paper, Clark and Chalmers present the idea of an active externalism, similar to semantic or content or externalism, in which objects within the environment function as part of the mind. They argue that this is arbitrary to say that the mind is contained only within the boundaries of the skull. The separation between the mind and the body and the environment is seen as an unprincipled distinction.
That's really fascinating. Exactly right. So because external objects play a significant role in aiding cognitive processes, the mind and the environment act as a coupled system. This coupled system can be seen as a complete cognitive system of its own. In this manner, the mind is extended into the external world. The main criterion that Clark and Chalmers list for classifying the use of external objects during cognitive tasks as a part of an extended cognitive system is that the external objects must function with the same purpose as the internal processes. In the extended mind, a thought experiment is presented to further illustrate the environment's role in connection to the mind. The fictional characters Otto and Inga are both traveling to a museum simultaneously. Otto has Alzheimer's disease and has written all of his directions down in a notebook to serve the function of his memory. Inga is able to recall the internal directions within her memory. In a traditional sense, Inga can be thought to have had a belief as to the location of the museum before consulting her memory. In the same manner, Otto can be said to have held a belief of the location of the museum before consulting his notebook. The argument is that the only difference existing in these two cases is that Inga's memory is being internally processed by the brain, while Otto's memory is being served by the notebook. In other words, Otto's mind has been extended to include the notebook as the source of his memory. The notebook qualifies as such because it is constantly and immediately accessible to Otto, and it is automatically endorsed by him. Dave?
Going further, the authors ask and answer their own question about the role of enculturalation. And what is about, this is a quote, and what about socially extended cognition? Could my mental states be partially constituted by the states of other thinkers? We see no reason why not, in principle. They bring up the recurrent theme of the role of language. This is why I want it to be the end of the show today. The major burden of the couplings, another quote, between agents is carried by language. Indeed, it is not implausible that the explosion of intellectual development in recent evolutionary time is due as much to this linguistically enabled extension of cognition as to any independent development in our inner cognitive resources.
The background here is the extended mind is an idea in the field of the philosophy of mind, often called extended cognition, which holds that the reach of the mind need not enter the boundaries of skin and skull. Tools, instruments, and other environmental props can, under certain conditions, also count as proper parts of our minds. Closely related topics, often conjoined with the idea of extended mind, are situated cognition, distributed cognition, and embodied cognition. Now, this is fascinating stuff, guys, and you could argue here that the Akashic record, therefore, in this extended mind kind of context, would also be part of you, essentially.
Absolutely.
Right now, the extended mind of language, and we can actually finish this in a book with the title "The Extended Mind: The Emergence of Language, the Human Mind, and Culture." Robert K. Logan in 2007 develops the thesis that verbal language extends the brain into a mind capable of conceptualizing, and hence, the mind equals brain plus language. The human brain, before it acquired verbal language, according to his thesis, is considered to be a percept processor. With language, the mind is capable of conceptualization and hence able to consider things that are not immediately available in the here and now. Dave?
The first words of verbal language are concepts associated with all of the percepts associated with those words. For example, the word water brings to mind water we drink, the water we cook with, the water we wash with, and the water we find in rivers, lakes, and oceans, and the water we find when it rains or when snow melts. Logan's thesis was first developed in a paper, The Extended Mind, Understanding Language and Thought in Terms of Complexity and Chaos Theory, and presented at the 7th Annual Conference of Society of Chaos Theory in Psychology and the Life Sciences at Marquette University, Milwaukee, Wisconsin on August the 1st, 1997. Mickey, that is a long time ago. That's 20 years ago.
It is, as a concept. Now, the important thing here to realize is that I think they're going about this backwards. So what they're saying here is, it is the language that has enabled us to do all the things we do today. I see language as a limitation, as a limiter. I believe, and this is something, because this is the thing, none of the scientists, none of the scientific community are encouraged to take telepathy seriously. And I'm not talking about thinking words as someone. I have to repeat this. I'm not thinking words as someone. I'm talking about pure telepathy. I'm talking about the original telepathy, which in my opinion predates language. Language came later and put a restrictive matrix on our minds. Very restrictive. In fact, so much so. In fact, on purpose, it seems, the mythology tells us, they on purpose confused us. They on purpose disallowed us to work together because they were afraid. I say they. Who are they? That's a good question, right? To which I have an imperfect answer. But if you know the hypothesis, you know what that is. So we were able to communicate perfectly and drive toward a common purpose in an unprecedented manner. Then the language confusion occurs. the language confusion, which seems to be a common theme across many, many different cultures, right? In fact, in some of these instances, cross-cultural contamination we can pretty much exclude as a theme here. But not only did we all have, or the legend says, or the myth says, we had one language, that's not that remarkable. I mean, that's what is remarkable is they all agree, almost, that we were punished for, trying to be like God, like the gods, or whatever, or threatening someone's rule, or whatever it may be. And that then brought about the language confusion. The punishment was that we lost the ability to communicate in one language. In my opinion, that one language, again, I say it again, is the original telepathy, non-language bound telepathy. And in order to cause strife amongst us, so we could not communicate anymore. I mean, think about it. The most divisive thing is that we can't all talk to each other. That's the most divisive thing. If we are exploring the world and we meet another tribe, we can't communicate. There's so many things that can go wrong, right? Because the language also shapes cultural perceptions. I mean, the people were dispersed. Apparently, that's what the catastrophe did. The Great Flood dispersed people, killed everybody, left a few survivors here, there, and everywhere, right? A new humanity was created, some say. But also, all of a sudden, we have this language. These languages we have now. We can no longer think at each other, right? And again, not words, but concepts and experiences